Another photonics company won't be moving into Eastman Business Park.
That company is Avigy. In a much celebrated announcement, the governor said that company would fuel economic growth in the region. But Avigy is now out of business, declaring bankruptcy before ever relocating here. As we discover, Avigy CEO now has another deal with the state to bring a new business to another city.
The private sector companies are coming.
That was Governor Cuomo in March 2016, announcing two photonics companies relocating from California to Rochester, Photonica and Avigy. The governor called it transformative.
Between the two companies, a $1.6 billion investment, 1,400 new jobs coming to Rochester.
But nearly 2 years later, News 10 NBC investigated and found that not one job and not one nickel has come to Rochester.
Excitement is in the air.
Within a year, the state had nixed its deal with Photonica, determining the company was incapable of moving forward. At least Avigy had a product, small electronic charging devices. But that deal is also dead. News 10 NBC has learned that Avigy has gone out of business and filed for bankruptcy.
The concern for me is if there's a failure, do we have clawback provisions attached to those contracts?
Fortunately, the state never invested the $40 million it pledged to Avigy, but the hope of hundreds of new Rochester jobs is gone. Now comes along another project just down the thruway in Syracuse. The state originally built this high-tech factory for $90 million to lure a business that planned to manufacture LED light bulbs. That company, Sora, walked away from the project with no penalty. Now the state is spending an additional $15 million to retrofit the facility for a new tenant called NextGen. So who is NextGen?
Turns out NextGen, the CEO of NextGen, is the same CEO of the failed Avigy.
That's right. Dinesh Ramanathan, the CEO of Avigy, put together new management and new investors and reformed as NextGen. Ramanathan did not respond to several of our requests for comment.
Anybody with half a brain is going to say, wait a minute, even though the state ended up not investing any money in Rochester, certain representations were made.
I caught up with State Senator John DeFrancisco recently at a public hearing about the NextGen deal, where he raised his concerns.
Why should taxpayers trust that NextGen will do what it says it's going to do?
I don't think taxpayers should.
He's not alone. This week, at a state budget hearing, lawmakers questioned Empire State Development President Howard Zemsky.
I'm proud of the job that we did working with business.
I had questions for Zemsky after the hearing, who acknowledged there are risks in any deal, but said he's confident the NextGen will succeed.
So why should taxpayers trust that this same owner is going to deliver this time around for NextGen?
Well, Avigy was really at the time, in fairness to Avigy, they've conducted themselves very professionally. They reconstituted their business plan, good for them. That happens in the tech space. You're talking about a dynamic industry with a lot of competition, a lot of technological breakthroughs.
The Avigy, Photonica, and Sora deals were all done by the development arm of SUNY Polytechnic Institute, whose former president is now facing corruption charges. Empire State Development was forced to take over many of the SUNY Poly projects.
Well, some would say that it's throwing good money after bad.
No, it's a way of really activating that site, I think, through good productive use for the benefit of economic development.
DeFrancisco says he's willing to support the NextGen agreement once he's convinced the state has a way to recoup its investment if the deal goes south.
There's got to be disclosure. There's got to be information provided to the public as to what the real deal is, so people can complain if there's not enough security or there's not enough skin in the game or there's not enough protection for the taxpayer.
Empire State Development says taxpayers will be protected in this deal. NextGen has pledged to create 290 jobs in Syracuse and will invest $40 million of its own money. ESD says the $15 million state grant comes with financial penalties if NextGen fails to meet those job projections.
Take a look at this mess. All that cleanup. It's been exactly 1 year since we got hit by a powerful windstorm, millions of dollars of damage.
But tonight, our investigators found out that state money to help rebuild is only going to a few select towns. News 10 NBC's chief investigative reporter Berkeley Breen tracked down the towns getting the money and those that aren't. Burke?
Right, first of all, it's been 12 months and not a single penny not a single town has received a single penny for the windstorm. But we found out some towns didn't even know the state money was there in the first place. The windstorm ripped through Monroe County like a hurricane. 1 month later, the Lake Ontario floods. By July, the governor signed this bill unlocking millions of dollars for flood relief. But look at what the News 10 NBC investigative team found deep inside the bill. I read it to Gates Supervisor Mark Cassini. This is the bill that was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. And it says that municipalities affected by the windstorm are eligible to apply for a grant under this subdivision. Did you know about this?
Absolutely not.
Supervisor Rossini says the town of Gates suffered $255,000 in damage. Nobody who knew about this told you about it?
This piece of information, this bill, was never communicated to me, and I've spoken to several of my colleagues. They knew nothing about it. That's
because the grant application in the bill never existed. But some towns like Irondequoit and Greece knew about it because they say they were told about the money. Now both are in line to get hundreds of thousands in storm aid. How did you know about getting this sort of aid for wind damage?
Well, we didn't really know. We just reached out to our state representatives and said, you know, is there any type of assistance? You know, we're dealing with quite a bit.
Supervisor Bill Rylick says he was alerted to the aid by Greece Assemblyman Peter Lawrence and Irondequoit Assemblyman Joe Morelli. Greece never filled out a grant application for the money because the application never existed. So you made calls to your assembly members and they told you this money's
Well, they said they'd see what they could do, and then some point down the road we received a call saying we're able to secure some funding to help reimburse you for some of those costs.
By the way, Greece had almost $1 million in damage. They think they're going to get about $325,000 from the state to pay for that windstorm. So if this is the law, why is the law not being followed?
News 10 NBC is exposing how New York State did not follow a law that would get money to towns hit by last year's windstorm. As we first reported last night, the law signed by the governor says there was supposed to be a grant application to get the money. That never happened. And so, as News 10 NBC Chief Investigative Reporter Berkeley Breen found out, a lot of towns didn't even know the money was available until we told them. Burke?
Right, because the grant system never got set up, Assemblyman Joe Morelli got $2 million from the State Assembly for windstorm damage. But because the application process now goes through his office, we found out some towns got contacted and some did not. Morelli says the windstorm money came up when the state was talking about Lake Ontario flood money.
So I, along with my colleagues in the Assembly, have been reaching out to supervisors, talking to them, and essentially asking them to submit to us what the costs are that were directly as a result of the windstorm.
Two things. First, the law says there should have been a grant application through the State Office of Empire State Development. Second, not every town knew about the money. Based on the phone calls to each town supervisor, News 10 NBC learned that Greece, Irondequoit, Webster, Penfield, and Henrietta were told about the windstorm money, but Chi-Lai, Ogden, Gates, Parma, and Monroe County were not. Greece knew about this, Irondequoit knew about it, Webster, but Monroe County didn't know about the money.
Well, Monroe County's not eligible.
Gates didn't know about the money?
Yeah, Monroe County's not eligible. It's only for towns.
Monroe County got flood relief money from the state, $1.5 million.
I think this process has raised significant concern.
Jesse Sleezer is the county spokesman.
The question is, why did a single assemblyman in the state legislature who represents this area end up having the sole discretion over how these very important dollars were distributed? These were dollars that were intended to offset costs that were ultimately borne by local taxpayers, and they end up getting doled out like pork.
How would you respond to a charge like that?
Well, I would say this, that I saw a need, and I guess I'm not necessarily concerned about what people want to call it. It is an appropriation which I secured, and so that's it, and we're distributing the money according to that.
Gates Supervisor Mark Cassini just tweeted this, quote, grateful to receive a call late this p.m. from Joe Morelli offering to help Gates recoup losses from the March 2017 windstorm. Looking forward to working together on this. Thanks at News 10 NBC for bringing us together on this issue. The storm cost Gates $255,000. It cost the town of Greece close to $1 million, and Greece is in line to get $325,000 in state aid through Morelli's office. Berkeley Breen, News 10 NBC.
New Finger Lakes Welcome Center opened with fanfare a few months ago in Geneva.
The state is promising it will help boost tourism, but if you're a taxpayer and not a tourist, you shelled out a lot for what's in this building. In tonight's New York State Exposed report, investigative reporter Jennifer Lukey got her hands on some of the line item costs, and the numbers will shock you.
Well, first, I want you to think about this. How much would you be willing to pay for this? A 10-inch stainless steel picture frame. The number in your head right now is likely nowhere near the amount the state of New York was willing to pay using your tax dollars.
There's no doubt the Finger Lakes Welcome Center is impressive.
I think it's great. It's clean, it's very bright and welcoming. Outside all the way through to the water is fantastic.
George Ferris is visiting from Florida and thought the same thing.
People are traveling through, they see this, they gotta stop.
When it opened back in June, Governor Andrew Cuomo joked he was behind the entire design.
The truth is, it was all me. Upside down canoe light fixtures. When I first said it, they mocked me. Look how well they work.
Indeed, but how much did all of this cost taxpayers? The governor said it was $5 million, but News 10 NBC wanted to see how the state spent every dollar of that, so we requested all of the contracts for the project. Last week, the state finally provided us with one of them, which covers about $750,000 worth of spending. It shows $150,000 of it was used for AV equipment, $60,000 for the kiosks. That all seems fairly standard. It's the cost of some of the smaller items in the contract that raises eyebrows. Those upside-down canoe light fixtures the governor was talking about, the boats were donated, but the rigging and lighting for each of them was $12,000 a piece. This road map of New York on the wall, $10,000. A selfie wall, which is wallpaper of a nature scene with the I Love New York logo on it, $13,000. 2 signs that point to the bathroom, $6,000. A community room sign, $3,000. And look at its placement, right next to a plastic sign that says the exact same thing. That one's required by law. And this one takes the cake. Remember how I said those hanging canoes were donated? Well, this 10-inch sign posted to tell us that cost taxpayers $1,014. Keep in mind, all of those are just fabrication costs. Installation was another $150,000. The management of putting it all together, $130,000.
Those boats were donated, but to hang them, it was $50,000.
Really? Wow.
The selfie wall in the corner, $13,000.
Really?
The sign telling people that the boats were donated, $1,000.
Holy mackerel.
George says while the center may encourage tourism, taxpayers are shelling out a lot on this welcome wagon.
That's one reason why I got out.
I reached out to Empire State Development, the state agency overseeing this project, and was told this $750,000 contract for decorating costs was the only one that went directly through their agency. The other $4.5 million spent on the center was funneled to the city of Geneva through a grant, so those contracts have to come from them. I asked whether ESD was keeping a close eye on the line items. A spokesman says a competitive bid process was used and, quote, each welcome center has been designed with regional assets in mind, ensuring an engaging experience for the many visitors who have and will continue to enjoy the beautiful facilities across the state.
So the statement doesn't address those costs at all.
In tonight's New York State Exposed report, is the state assembly serious about ethics reform?
The former director of the Assembly's Ethics and Compliance isn't so sure. She quit the job, describing it as a waste of money. I met with her after tracking her down in Colorado.
I never felt like they really wanted me to do much.
Jane Feldman arrived in Albany in 2015, thinking she was coming to the Capitol to help clean up corruption.
What do you make of the charges?
The former Assembly Speaker was facing fraud and extortion charges, and his successor, Carl Hastie, created a new position, the head of the Assembly Office of Ethics and Compliance.
It was my understanding to really look at their processes and procedures and laws and try to figure out why New York has had so much more corruption or members and elected officials in trouble really than most other states.
Feldman, a former prosecutor who then spent 6 years as executive director of Colorado's Independent Ethics Commission, seemed like the perfect candidate. But shortly after taking the job, she began to have doubts about her role. When you get there and you're gung-ho to start,
right,
what did they give you to do?
Well, really not a whole lot.
After only 18 months, she became frustrated and quit. she returned to Colorado. Recently, I flew out to Denver and sat down with Feldman, where she had a lot to say about her short time in Albany.
Do you think you were hired more as a public relations move?
Well, you know, that is sort of my belief.
At $120,000 a year, Feldman says she believed she was going to be involved in crafting ethics policy. Instead, she was primarily conducting training sessions for state employees. Feldman told friends the job was a waste of money, something she now says was probably a poor choice of words.
What did you think of her comment when she said that the job was a waste of money?
I think that's wrong. Absolutely wrong.
Assemblyman Bill Magnarelli headed up the search committee that ultimately selected Feldman for the ethics job.
When you talked to her, what did you tell her her role would be as it related to ethics and policy?
Well, you know, this was a new position, so exactly what it was going to be was not completely thought out.
Magnarelli says Feldman misread what she was hired to do.
What we were looking for is someone to teach not only the members, but also all of the staffs, you know, exactly what was required of them as far as ethics was concerned.
I would not have accepted this job if they had said it's just going to be training.
In fact, according to the announcement about the newly created position, the posting said the person selected for the job would be proactive in identifying areas where our rules and regulations need improvement. The turning point for Feldman?
I was in my apartment in Albany, and I watching the 6 o'clock news, and the speaker had a press conference announcing that he was introducing widespread ethics reform. I knew nothing about it.
Do you think that's something you should have been involved in?
Absolutely.
We tried repeatedly to speak with Hastie, but no one from his office would return our calls or emails for comment. Feldman says in her year and a half, she only met with the speaker once.
In fact, when I left, nobody from the speaker's office asked to talk to me about why I was leaving.
Feldman did have ideas to clean up Albany. She says, among other things, the legislature needs to reform its per diem policy and be more transparent when it comes to publishing findings from the Ethics Commission.
Do you think New York is serious about ethics reform?
I mean, I think they are serious about ethics reform.
Feldman left the job almost 8 months ago. And while Magnarelli says they are committed to filling the position, they've yet to begin a new search.